Okay, so welcome everyone to this virtual taster session for higher level teaching assistant program. We are Best Practice Network, and we are one of the leading providers of HLTA in the country. And we've been delivering HLTA since its creation in 2004. Today, we are joined by Dean Boyce, our CPD and Accreditation Director, and Nick Thornber, HLTA Program Lead. So now, thank you very much, and over to Nick.
Welcome, everyone. Good evening. So I'm Nick Thornber, and as Kasia said, I am the lucky person who gets to lead on most of our online sessions and manage part of the program. We at BPN have been doing this for 19 years, and we have a 99% pass rate. So if you're looking for reasons why you should do this with us, as well as the fact that we'll support you immensely and you'll have loads of fun, I think the fact that we've got lots and lots of experience and a 99% pass rate should encourage you. We now work mainly online, and it's going really well with great feedback from participants. Occasionally, we run a specialised session in a school in one or two areas of the country. We would love to have you along with us in either of those. Let me tell you a couple of things that we know. We know that teaching assistants are brilliant. I've been a teacher in secondary, primary and special schools, and I honestly would not survive in those roles if it wasn't for outstanding, phenomenal teaching assistants. So what we've got to do on this program is help you to prove that you work at that higher level, that you can achieve higher level teaching assistant status, and that you can provide the evidence needed in 3 different ways to show that. We're sure you can. We really believe in you, and we all love working on this program, helping you to prove it. We're going to help you by writing examples of your work. There are different ways of doing that, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Some people love that. I had somebody this week telling me how much they love writing, like writing prose, going into detail. Lots of people tell me, I'd rather do it in bullet points, and that's absolutely fine. I'd rather do it in notes, and we can work with that. People do it in different ways, and we'll support you. But we'll teach you what it is you need to write. We'll show you how to present it in a way that helps an assessor say, yeah, this person really is a brilliant, outstanding teaching assistant. They are higher level. So you have to write about it. You also have to be able to talk about it, and others have to talk about you. And so we'll help you know what that is, what needs to be said, how to talk about your work, how to present yourself in a way that really gets across that you are as awesome as we know. And you also have to share with us some documents that you use in your work. For instance, you might use a lesson plan. You don't need to have written it. You might use a lesson plan, or you might have examples of children's work, or maybe you have a school policy on marking or assessment, something like that. And we'll show you how to share those documents with us and tell us how you use them in your work. To help you understand this a bit better, I'm going to talk about 3 of the standards. There are 33 standards for HLTA that were written slightly longer than that, 19 years ago, 20 years ago, when the original trial took place. And one of those standards is Standard 11. And Standard 11 says that people who are working as teaching assistants at the higher level must have a certain level of English, literacy, maths, numeracy. And you have to be working at what's called level 2, so that for a lot of you, that will be a GCSE, grade C or above. If you're doing your GCSEs more recently, it might be a number. If you're as old as me, you might have an O level. If you have got your qualifications somewhere else in a different part of the system, it might mean something else. And I'll show you just very briefly an extract from something that we can send you. I know you can't read that on the screen at the moment. Don't worry about that. But it's we have something that we can send you that lists all the different things that you might have that show you are working at the right level in terms of your literacy and numeracy. So for Standard 11, we check that before you actually join. So we make sure that you've got what you need and that you're ready, you're good to go before we start. That leaves us with 32 standards. And what I want to do is just talk briefly about two of them, Standard 8 and Standard 27, and help you to understand a little bit about what you would write, what you would say, and what documents you might use. And that's, we're calling this a taster tonight. So it's to give you an idea of how easy it is and how much support there is for you to be able to show that you are really working at that high level that we're talking about. So Standard 8 officially says, understand the key factors that affect children and young people's learning and progress. And what that means is any child whatsoever that you care to think about might have stuff going on in their life, good things, not such good things, that impact on their learning. And Standard 27 says, recognise and respond appropriately to situations that challenge equality of opportunity. So I've just made a note on there, situations that challenge equality of opportunity. I'm going to explain a little bit more about what in practice that will actually be. So here's an example for Standard 8. Dean's invited you to put any questions that you might have into the chat. So feel free to drop any questions you've got into the chat as I'm talking, if something's not clear, if you want to check the meaning, but also feel free to answer this question, if you want to, into the chat. Have you, in your role as a teaching assistant, found yourself with a child who's upset and had to help them sort that out? Have you found yourself maybe in the last week with a child who's come to school hungry and they're so hungry they can't access learning? Is that something that has happened to you? What did you do about it? Have you had a situation where, unfortunately, a child has had a bereavement, a death in the family? Are you working with any refugees? Children come from a whole variety of situations, and they come to school sometimes with stuff going on in their life. Like I say, it's not all negative stuff. It could be good things. It may be that they have another language as well as English that they speak, which is a good thing. You may have somebody who has a different cultural background. They have different life experiences. They have a different religion. What do you do to support those? Do you do different things? In one of the written tasks, you might, for instance, be doing some work with your children about Father's Day. Maybe you're doing an art lesson and you're getting the children to think about the men in their life who are positive role models in their life. Might be dad, might be somebody else. And you become aware that one of your children, one of your learners, this is going to be hard. Maybe dad has gone, or maybe there's a problem, or maybe there aren't positive role models, sadly, male role models in their life. So you think, what can I do? Can I do something different? And what we're saying is that in one of the tasks that you write, in one of these things that you write up for us, or when you're talking to us, you would give us a little bit of detail about that. What was the situation? Confidentially, obviously, not naming the child. What happened? What did you do? How did you help that child? What difference did it make? So here's another example. And I've taken this from a real one that somebody that we assessed in a secondary school. They were doing a big project in the school on Remembrance Sunday, and the children were actually preparing to go to attend a remembrance service in the community, and it was a big deal for this community. But this teaching assistant became aware that one of her learners, being a refugee, had actually come from a place which was at war. And so their awareness and sensitivity to war wasn't based on the history of World War I and II. It was based on the history of what they'd seen a few weeks ago. So she supported that child. She invested time and energy in that child to help them understand what it is that we do with Remembrance Sunday, to talk to them about how they were feeling, whether they wanted to take part, were they comfortable, and she put special provision in place for them. So she would write about that, or if she was talking about it with an assessor, she could explain in a bit more detail than you can get down in writing. And then, for instance, for the document that she might use, maybe there was an art lesson, like I said in the first example. So there's a piece of artwork that the child did do. So she would use that. It doesn't tell us the whole story on its own. It just gives us that idea, that little bit of information that helps people to understand your work, your role, and your situation. And I mentioned before, by the way, that I've worked in special schools. I was a head in special schools, as well as doing a little bit in primary and lots in secondary. We can make this work for all of those settings. So whichever setting you're working in with young learners, whatever level you're at, whatever ability there is, we can help you to find examples that suit your particular circumstances. As I said before, do feel free, if you've got questions or thoughts or anything you want to check or contribute, feel free to go ahead and add that to the chat at this time. So Standard 27 is another one that we always have really long debates on. I was delivering day 2 of our work yesterday, and there was quite a long discussion about Standard 27. So this is that one that's about equality, and the law tells us that it's against the law to discriminate against people because of things like their age, their gender reassignment, whether or not they're married or in a civil partnership, pregnancy, maternity leave, disability, race, including colour, nationality, ethnicity, national origin, religions, beliefs, sex, sexual orientation. All of those are things called protected characteristics. And your school almost certainly has a policy about equality. And what we're interested in is, have you read it? Have you had a look? And do you follow that policy? Can you give us an example of how you've tackled discrimination in your school? So here's my example. You were perhaps walking along the corridor or you're in a lesson and you heard a discriminatory remark. I'm not going to give examples at the moment, specific examples, but a racist remark, a homophobic, a sexist remark. You heard something that was not appropriate for children to be saying. And so you remembered your school policy and you dealt with it according to your school policy. So maybe it was very serious and you unfortunately had to have a meeting with staff, the child's parents. Maybe it was a simpler thing and it was a straightforward question of addressing the child, explaining what was not acceptable and making them think again, moving them forward with it. You would write that up, and then when the assessor was talking to you, so they read all that, and when they were talking to you, they might think, okay, that's very clear, but I'm still going to ask you about other times you've done it. Or possibly they are going to read about it and say, I didn't quite understand everything you've written. Can you tell me a little bit more? Can you explain it further? So Standard 27 is almost certainly one about dealing with things to do with discrimination that you'll get asked about. So you'll discuss it. And then for the document, I always recommend now that you use an extract from the policy in question, that's the thing that you actually choose to share with us. So at that point, are there any questions? I'll just pause slightly and take a sip of water. Are there any questions at that point that anybody wants to either ask out loud or ask in the chat?
Nick, in the absence of any questions, by all means do ask somebody else if you've got a question, but I just wanted to point out verbally what I put into the chat that Nick here has provided a few excellent examples of Standard 8, the key factors, but reassured also that there are a wide range of key factors. And as Nick says, we find that our HLTA candidates, sometimes with our support, sometimes without, are well able to identify situations where key factors were at play and actions they took in response. And similar for Standard 27, our handbook and the resources we use on our programme will help you to identify example for all the standards that you need to prove. And that's part of our commitment to making sure we support you in understanding the standards and understanding what real life situations in school relate to those standards.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit more about writing about you. Some people do this brilliantly. Some people absolutely love every minute of it. Some people really like the fact that we've got loads and loads of support materials. We've got people who can help you, people who can talk you through bits during the 2 days. This is, such an important thing. There are so many resources, a handbook, extra resource materials, recordings, all kinds of things that you can access here. One of the things you've got to write about is a good one-to-one lesson that you've given. And I don't want to stress here, we're talking about, for the first thing that you write about, picking an occasion when you've worked one-to-one, that you're teaching, that it's a real lesson. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end. It's not sort of leaning over somebody at a table and just helping them to remember to underline their work and draw the margin. It's a full teaching them a new piece of information lesson, and it's a successful one. That's the key. So I'm sure that amongst the people attending today and watching the recording, I'm sure that is something that you do loads and loads and loads. But you would certainly need to before you were assessed. Another thing that we ask you to write about is a time you've worked with a group. Now, many people who come on this programme are from secondary and primary schools, and group work normally, therefore, means 3 to 8 children. It can be a bit bigger, but it usually means 3 to 8 children. But I'm very conscious as a former special school head that can be really different for you if you're working in special schools. Don't worry. We'll support you with that. We'll help you understand what the difference is for you between the one-to-one and the talking about the group situation. But again, the idea is that as a group, they're all working towards broadly the same aim, the same outcome, and you support them. And the way you support them and the way you invest in that, that has made the difference. So now they know something that they didn't know before. Now they have an ability they didn't have before. They couldn't get baskets when you were playing basketball. You taught them a technique, now they can. They couldn't do number bonds to 10. You've invested time and energy into their work. Now they can do it. And within a lesson, you taught them a new thing, you check they know it, and it's a successful lesson. One of the ones that some people haven't yet done, but by the end of the process you will need to have done, is to have taught a whole class. And your head teacher needs to say that they'll definitely support you in teaching whole classes with no teachers in the room. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have other adults in the room. You might have a volunteer. As long as they're not actually also a qualified teacher, that's fine. You might have other teaching assistants. As long as they're just supporting you and you're the most senior person in the room and you're in charge of the whole lesson, you don't need to have written the lesson necessarily. But as long as you're in charge of the whole lesson and it's a successful lesson, that is the thing that you would write about. So they're the 3 big ones. They're about 2 to 3 pages long, but we give you a framework for it. So you're filling in boxes and we give you loads of guidance about what to put in each box. So that works out really well in the end. And then you write about 5 other things that you do in your work. So I've got a question for you. Feel free to answer it in the chat or just in your head. But what were you doing at 11 o'clock this morning? What were you doing at 2 o'clock last Friday afternoon? Whatever you were doing in those times, is that something you do a lot? Maybe you do lots of maths. Maybe you do lots of PE. Maybe over the years, you've learned loads and loads of work around phonics. So what you do in these things is you talk about what you are good at, what you've been successful about, and you write about those things. That's what we're talking about here. Somebody's asked in the chat there, what's the size of a whole class? It's whatever's a real whole class. So if a real whole class in your school is 30 children, that's what it is. If you're in a special school and it's 12, then that's what it is. It's fine. But you're talking about writing about lessons that you've done successfully, using your qualities, your skills. That's what we're talking about. And then these smaller tasks, talking about what you contribute to the school, assemblies you've helped with, playground duties, incidents that took place. Honestly, anything that you do in your work, you can write about. When it comes to these documents that you've got to collect, really, if I'm absolutely honest, it's quite a small part of the process to us as assessors. But for you, it does take a bit of thought and a bit of planning. So there are 33 standards in total. Standard 11 is dealt with before you come on. So it's 32 that you've got to find a document for. So it might be a piece of a child's work. that's one of your documents, and that works because it tells us something about one of the standards. That's a really good thing. Maybe you'll use several different pieces of work. That works really well. Perhaps it's a photograph of a display that you've done. It's got to be your involvement. That's the thing. So maybe you've done a display about people who help us in society, and you've got all the children, all the learners to do things about different people they know who contribute to society and help. They've put that on a display. You've coordinated it. You've marked it, given feedback on it, and you think, yeah, this is what I did with my whole class activity. I'm going to share a photograph of that. This is what we mean by documents, things that tell us more, give us more breadth to understand what you do in your work. Maybe you show us some policies that you use. Perhaps you've got a marking policy in your school and you follow that marking policy. Now, I've worked in lots of different schools in different situations, and I know sometimes policies are 8 pages long. We don't need to see 8 pages. If you're telling us that you marked a particular child's work according to the policy, just take the bit of the policy that's relevant, take a screenshot of it or a photograph of it, and share that with us. Lesson plans are great. It can be anything that you can call a document or make into a document can really work for this. One of the things that happens is that you have this opportunity to talk about your work. And what's really important here is that some of you will do really well with the written work. Some of you will have a strength in talking about your work. Some of you will do the documents brilliantly. Some of you will do it all brilliantly. And we'll help you with all that and filling in the gaps. But when it comes to talking about the work, you have a particular day that is your assessment day, and you'll have a chat basically that day with the assessor. And they're going to also talk to a teacher who knows you really well. It's got to be somebody who knows you well. And they usually talk to the head, but sometimes the head likes to appoint somebody else in senior management or a senior person in school. It needs to be a different person from the teacher. And all of these people could get asked, you and the teacher and the head could get asked about any standard, absolutely any standard. So I've mentioned standard 8 a lot. So you might get asked a question like this right at the beginning. You might get asked a simple question like, tell me about the children in your school. And it's an opening question. It's to get you talking about the children, what they're like, what their needs are, what's brilliant about them, and how you support them. And that's an opening general question. And when the assessor asks you that, you're chatting away, maybe it's on Zoom like this, and they're going to write it all down. They're going to write down what you're saying. So they're gathering all that evidence about what you do. And let's say it's standard 27. They might have a meeting with the head teacher, and they might say, oh, I was just speaking to him, the candidate who wants to be HLTA. I was just speaking to him, and he's told me a really good example of how he addressed an issue to do with discrimination. Can you think of any examples where you've seen their good practice in that area? And so the head can add a bit of depth and a bit of details to what you've already said. Standards 10, 17 and 18 are all about what I was just saying before, about this idea that you're worth having in school, because maybe you're great at PE, maybe you do loads and loads of phonics work. Perhaps you are regularly attached to the science department. Maybe you're doing lots and lots of support work in literacy. And so 10, 17 and 18 are 3 standards that kind of go together. And 10 is checking that you have something you bring to the school that makes you worth having around. And 17 is asking you, do you contribute to the school? Do you make a difference to planning? And 18 is, do you plan your own work? Are you good at that? Do you engage with that? And then 29 and 30 and 31, they relate back to those things I was telling you before, where I said you'd want to write about the time you worked one-to-one and it was a successful lesson. So that's 29. And you'd want to write about a time you worked with a group and that was a successful lesson. That's 30. And you'd want to write about a time you taught a whole class and it was successful. That's 31. Well, you're also going to get asked about them. So let's say you taught an art lesson last week and it was really brilliant and you wrote it all up. And the assessor might say to you, was that a one-off or have you taught loads of artwork? Have you done lots and lots of music lessons? Have you done any other subjects? Can you give me a bit more detail about other whole class teaching that you've done? So they're kind of adding to that. They're adding to that breadth. So what's happening then? Right. So I'll give you an idea, a bit of a flavour of what the standards are, that you have to write things, you have to produce documents and share them with us, and you have to talk about it. How's it going to happen? What would happen if you decided to join in and do this now? Well, first thing is that you could apply online. And maybe you've already seen that, but you apply online and it takes you through step by step. If you originally heard of us through another organisation, they might have given you a code and they might say, pop the code in when you're applying online. That's because that gives us a chance to say thank you to them for helping you get to us. We'll check the standard 11 thing, this business about your literacy and numeracy. And we check that your school is supporting you, that the head teacher is definitely aware of what's going on and that they're really happy to support you with the work that will involve. And we run these courses all through the year. So there are courses, there are going to be new courses starting in September. There's courses starting next week, actually. But there's courses starting in September for definite. They're often on Wednesdays and Fridays. If that doesn't work for you, let us know. We can see what we can do about different days. And it happens all year round. So plenty of opportunity. We've worked with hundreds of people this year. Once you're on the course, you get allocated a date. Hopefully the date works for you. Just get in touch. If not, we can find you another one. And we send you a link and you go onto our website, which I'm going to try and show you in a minute. And when you click on that link, it'll say prepare for day one. And there's a video to watch and there's a little thing to read. Not much, really. Maybe download some things and you're good to go. Day one comes along and we send you a link, Zoom link. You log on, we do a session in the morning, lots of chance to chat to people, meet other teaching assistants up and down the country. We have a few laughs usually on the way and have a bit of fun with it, and we learn a lot together. Then you have quite a long break, but it's not kind of go off and go back to the classroom because you have some work to do ready for the afternoon. You have to go to this thing called prepare for session. So you've done preparation for session one, you do tongue-tied preparation for session 2 or session B. And then after day one, you do those draft tasks. Now, I have to say, this week, for instance, every single person that submitted those draft tasks, they were extremely good. And hardly anybody needed to change anything. They could use their draft tasks as their real tasks for the real assessment. They were absolutely amazing. Sometimes people need to tweak them a little bit, but people are getting better at that. So that's really encouraging. But you do the draft tasks. It is quite a bit of work, but it's worth it because you get the feedback. You come to day 2. We use the feedback to help you through day 2. And then 4 to 12 weeks after that, you have your actual assessment day. That is then moderated. And this is important and something I want to stress to you. It takes a while to get your outcome. And that's because we're checking your results against all the other hundreds of people we're working with. So that when you get your certificate and you get your email saying you are higher level, you know that you've achieved at exactly the same wonderful level that everybody else who's ever done this with us has done. And that's really important because then I strongly encourage you to go out and celebrate. So I'm going to have a look at Canvas now. And Dean, while I'm just going to stop the share and go back to that. Do you want to just pick up on anything? I think you made a note in the chat. about something you wanted us to make sure we said?
Sure, yes, thank you, Nick. There were a couple of questions in the chat about the number of children for whole class. And I think it can be a little bit confusing, so I'll try my best to explain whole class teaching, standard 31. Excuse me. I would say that whole class teaching isn't defined by a number, and it's about the level of complexity that we would associate with what whole class teaching is. If you are asked by the teacher to take 32 children, sit them on a carpet, read them a story, and at the end tell them to go away and colour in a picture of the cover, that's not whole class teaching. It might be 32 children, but it's not whole class teaching. I think in whole class teaching, we would associate that with some level of differentiation. So I worked previously in primary where at SATS time, we would take classes of 16 out from the main classes and do some work with them, some learning. Now, excuse me. Now, if you've got 16 children, and they've all got the same learning objective, and they've all got the same resource, and they're all doing the same work all at the same time, all together, that to me isn't whole class teaching. If you've got 16 children and it's differentiated 3 ways, and you've got different LOs or slightly different learning outcomes, that becomes more complicated. That makes it more like whole class teaching. Excuse me. But the bottom line is this. We don't want to discriminate against individuals on this program based on their context. If you tell us that in the context of your school, this class of children you're working with is what is considered to be a class in the context of your school, special school, secondary school, PRU, whatever, such that do teachers teach this as a class? Is there a class register for this class? And if that's genuinely the case, that bunch of pupils are treated as a class, and your head teacher and your teacher say, yes, in the context of this school, that is a whole class, we're not going to say that it isn't the case, because we will take your head teacher and teacher's word for it, that that is whole class in your context. I also want to pick up on how often, because standard 31 is about 2 things. Do you have the ability to advance learning in whole class situations with no teacher present? And have you done so on occasion? On occasion doesn't mean loads of times. You do not have to prove that you take whole classes every week. Gaining HLTA status doesn't mean you then have to go and teach whole classes every day, every week. It's about showing your competency. Are you able to do it? So my suggestion to you is, if you haven't yet done whole class teaching and you're looking to do HLTA, talk to your school and see if you can arrange the opportunity to lead whole class teaching on at least a couple of occasions so that you can build up that experience. So when the assessor asks, how often have you taken whole classes, you can hand on heart honestly say that on at least 2 occasions you have taken and led whole class teaching with no teacher present, where whole class is the context of your school. The next question is, that's great, I can see you've taken whole classes. How do you know that you advanced their learning? Because if you can show that you've led whole class teaching with no teacher present in the context of your school on 2 or more occasions, and that you show you've got the ability to advance learning in those situations, that's what we're looking for standard 31. I hope that's given some sort of clarification. Back to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's definitely something that I end up having as manager lots of individual conversations with people about. The bottom line is, whatever your context and situation, we can work with you and we can make you successful in terms of HLTA. We know we can. When you've gone through that process and your head teacher says, yeah, I can support you with that. That's valuable for the school. And hopefully they've agreed to pay. Some teaching assistants pay to come on this themselves. But hopefully you get your head teacher to pay and you're signed up and you've proved that you've got that standard 11 and you're good to go. You get a specific date, you get your Zoom link, and you get access to this website called Canvas. Now, Canvas, when you open it up, is a dynamic page. And what that means is that if you open it up on different devices or open it up in different ways, it looks slightly different. So don't worry if you've already been on Canvas and thought, well, it didn't look like that when I did it, or when you go on it in the future. I've got an access to it and I've squashed it up on the page and it looks the way it does. But all these features will be there when you come on. So you've got start there, which is an introduction to things. You've got a resources section. Let's have a look. So many resources that we have available to you there. The forms that you have to fill in, the handbook, example materials, a summary of the actions that you have to take to do that, a list of the standards, all sorts of things that you've got there. So loads and loads of resources there. There's more than that, actually. Then you've got this section called Prepare for Session A. And so that's the thing that you would have to do. And all you've got to do is watch that video. And then it tells you to have a look at this activity. And you only have to have a look. And it gives you 9 of the standards. And it just says, get thinking about these because you're going to talk about them on the first morning. There's the handbook for you to download and a few bits more information. So that's your preparation. I think people probably spend 10, 15 minutes on it before the session, just making sure that they're absolutely ready. You do session A. There's that gap during the course of the day when you have a coffee break, your lunch, etc. But you've also got an hour or so working on this. You click on Prepare for Session B, which I'm not going to click on just now, and you do the things you need to do ready for the afternoon. But basically, it's another video and another task just to quickly read. It doesn't take you too long at all. After the first day, we ask you to do these drafts. Now, as I said, this week it's really interesting because almost everybody did the drafts, but a couple of people couldn't do the drafts or they couldn't do all 3. Life gets in the way. You know, sometimes you have personal stuff going on. We're so supportive. I really want to stress this. If you face challenges, if you have difficulties, we will support you. We'll find ways around things to help you. But in the group that I did yesterday, almost everybody did the drafts and to an exceptionally high standard. And what was interesting about that is we start day 2, session C, by going over the feedback. And Dean, you'll be really pleased to know we finished early session C yesterday because there wasn't much feedback to go over because they'd done so well. So that was absolutely brilliant. But generally speaking, in session C, there's a video for you to watch about a woman called Amy Alexander. And we watch her and we think, what standards is she achieving? How do we know? What are we looking for? So you watch that video, we talk about it on the day, and you also on the day you talk about those drafts that you did. Then over the break on day 2, you work on an example of one of those smaller tasks. I was walking down the corridor, 2 of the children had a bit of a scuffle. I sorted it out. I followed the school's behaviour policy. You write it all up, claim some standards, short things, real things from your work. Then there's help with final preparation. There's a link here to something called an e-portfolio. And what that is, that's a folder, really, an electronic folder, where you only put those documents we were talking about, your example of a child's work, your school policy on a particular thing. 33 standards in all, remember, but 11 is dealt with. So you're putting one document for each of the 32 standards into there. Not opening that now. You don't even need to look inside that until a few weeks before your real assessment. But there is this that I wanted to show you, and this is going to grow over the summer, but this is a revision and further guidance section. And sometimes people come back to us and they say, oh, I wasn't sure about task 1. Here's a video to help you. Oh, I wasn't completely sure about standard 7. Here's a video to help you. Standards 1 to 7, here's a video, watch that, you get extra guidance. One final thing to show you is over here, we've got some quizzes. When you've done a bit of preparation, there are some quizzes for you to take. And most people now are doing these quizzes and getting really high scores. We're not assessing you on that at all. But when people get a high score, they can have real confidence they're ready. If you get a low score, that's okay. Maybe that means you need to go back to the handbook. Maybe you need to ask for some more help, and that will be available. So that's just a quick insight to the massive array of resources. You've got ongoing support, an email address you can contact. You've got resources on there. You've got a handbook, videos, so many extra things, example work, all sorts of things there. Personal feedback on your work, one of the drafts that you do. And like I say, a 99% success rate. It's actually, if you're interested in the maths, fractionally more. With over 300 participants this year, a couple of people haven't quite made it, and we've had to give them a little bit more support, and then they can go again. And a couple of people, sadly, haven't quite made it. That does happen occasionally. It's very unusual, but we're really proud of our success rate. So that's everything from me. Hopefully there are some questions.
Okay, so no new questions at the moment. I'll just give you time, people listening in, to write some questions in the chat, and we'll go through those if there are any. Whilst we're waiting for people to type, I'm just going to add to what Nick has said about, why BPN. I recognise, and we recognise, that our HLTA programme, we think it's extremely good value for money, but we recognise that if you type in HLTA on the internet search, you might find some providers who offer HLTA at a cheaper price. The reason ours is where it is because we do not want to cut corners. We can guarantee you that the experience you get in terms of preparation and assessment is the same as the first 45,000 people who did preparation and assessment for HLTA between 2004 and 2019-20. We have a system. We are a national provider. You can be assured that when you get a certificate saying, congratulations, you've been awarded HLTA status from Best Practice Network, that certificate can be recognised around the country, because we're a national provider. We work in all government office regions. They're moderated to those standards, and it gives your school the confidence that you've been through a set of professional standards and you have been externally validated as meeting those standards by experts in this particular field. And Best Practice Network, as an organisation, we work with many, many thousands and thousands of participants and hundreds of schools on NPQ, an early career framework, so schools know us and are aware of us. And I say we've been a leading organisation in the world of HLTA since it started. So I hope that gives you the confidence that signing up with us, doing HLTA with us, is going to be a really good experience. You're going to get loads of support, and we'll help you to get through over the line. So questions there coming up now. If you
I'll take them, Dean. So you can.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
So if you apply for the course, can you do anything before September? So what I would recommend is that you start a folder on your computer and you start collecting things in there, writing up what you've been doing, just making notes for yourself, really, making sure that you have got some documents, keeping samples of children's work. That's the kind of thing that I would recommend that you do as you're doing that. Shopner says, when does the course start in September? We're just finalising the staffing availability. So the first one I'm running is the last Wednesday in September. Can't remember the date off the top of my head, but there might be one a little bit earlier than that, run by my colleague Nicola. But mid to late September will be the first day ones. Nikki says, although you have videos, will there also be a person to email if more support was needed? Yes, absolutely. You get an email address that we mention at the start and end of every session, actually. You can email any question, really. In the early days, when I was doing my training with Dean, he used to say jokingly that if you asked a question that was clearly in the handbook, you'd get a black mark, but nothing of that sort really happens. Just ask your questions. People come back to us with questions all the time, but pretty much everything is covered in the handbook, the videos and the materials. But if you find it isn't, or you can't access it, or it doesn't work for your style of learning, you've got an email address, you drop us a line. And what happens is that increasingly people like Monica, her colleague Michael, and other people on the team, they can just they've seen the question before, so they go, yeah, and I know the answer. They just reply. If they can't answer it, they bounce it to me. If I'm away on leave or something like that, they bounce it to Dean, and you usually get a response fairly quickly if you email something in. So absolutely, there's ongoing support if it's needed. Any more questions coming in? Monica, have I missed any in the chat?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Anything else then from anybody else? The key message I want to get across is we really believe passionately that teaching assistants are incredibly important, that you make such a difference. Somebody showed me a thing from Facebook today, and it said teaching assistants were created because teachers need heroes too. And I absolutely endorse that. You make a massive difference, but it's not just my opinion. Well-trained, well-organized teaching assistants with the right support from teachers, it has been shown, for instance, by the Education Endowment Foundation, it has been shown that you make a massive difference to outcomes for children. So absolutely, I don't want you in any way, shape or form to think, this isn't for you. It is. We can make this work for you and your situation. So if you want a place in September on the course, because you've got to have access online, you've got to have the preparation materials, you do need to have applied by the end of August. But if you apply after the end of August, you'll still get a place. It'll be just a little bit later than September. It'll probably be one of the October ones. If for the person who's asking that particular question, that's a real issue. If you're really keen to get started in September, but you're not absolutely sure that your school will be able to financially support it, then get in touch with us separately and explain that you were on this and that you discussed that. Monica, or Graham, just remind me, if we type responses, can our colleagues see the responses typed? Can they see the HLTA back at bestpracticenet.org.org? That's not right, is it? bestpracticenet.org.co.uk, isn't it?
Don't believe so.
Anyway, if they email that address, do they? Sorry, if they can see that email address there, that's what I'm just checking. Do you think people can see it? Let me put it on. Oh, Nick says we can see it. Thank you. And it is HLTA at bestpracticenet.co.uk. So, yeah, we can see it. All of these people saying they can see it. Thank you. That's fabulous news. Yeah. So if you drop us a line, if anything we've said isn't clear, or you've got any concerns, or you're really keen to start in September, but you're not sure about the school budget, drop us a line. I'll see what I can do. It may be possible to kind of gently look at a way of negotiating something there for you. We really want you to be able to do it if you want. But yeah, we're kind of ongoing. This last year, I think we've run somewhere between 14 and 18 different courses. Next year, it's looking like we'll probably run something like 20. So it's basically one a fortnight. So there'll be a course for you. There's no two worries about it. Okay. Thank you so much for coming along. Any finishing remarks from you, Dean, or Monica, or Graham, for that matter?
Just thank you to everybody. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Graham. Thank you to everyone for coming along. And we look forward to working with as many of you as possible in the next academic year. Thank you.